Now, this isn't going to be like my normal style of video for the most part because I tried to write the script for this video in particular really since the middle of December, and I would write the script and I would do the recording, and it didn't feel as authentic as I wanted it to be about this specific topic. So this one's a bit more laid back. It's not as much of a scripted video about Ben Simmons, obviously, if you read the title. So I just want to get that out of the way. That doesn't mean that I'm changing the style in general. This video in particular, I need to do in this style to get the points that I want to get across. But with that being said, let's talk about Ben Simmons. Now, Ben Simmons is currently out of the rotation with Brooklyn. I do want to make it very clear. I believe that is because of an injury, because he has a knee injury right now, not because of his performance. I feel like he would still probably be playing if he was healthy right now, but even if he's out of the rotation when healthy, it still is the point. He's not starting, and he's coming off the bench, which it does make sense. The other guys on the team that seemed a bit better, guys like Mikal Bridges is better right now. Mikal is a better player than Ben Simmons at this point. Dorian Finney-Smith seems to fit better. So those guys are starting and Ben's coming out the bench because right now he just really doesn't offer a lot on offense, which is concerning considering he's coming out the bench and he's making $35+ million a year at 26, 27 years old. So that is concerning from a former number 1 overall pick that really can't start because of his deficiencies at this point in his career when he really should be in the prime of his career right now. So that is something that I think really is telling at the point we're at with Ben Simmons and his basketball career. I think it's safe to say Ben Simmons has been massively disappointing in Brooklyn this season, especially when compared to what Harden, the player that he was basically traded for, is doing right now with the Philadelphia 76ers. I understand that the trade was more about Brooklyn getting rid of Harden than them wanting Ben Simmons, but even with that, and also understanding the fact that when you trade away the best player, you're not going to get the best return in the deal, it's still the point that, like, it's not even close. And it's not disappointing because Ben Simmons isn't James Harden. I don't think anyone ever expected him to be James Harden. It's disappointing because he's just not good. He's an absolute liability in the half court this season. He refuses to try and score in the half court. He's a player that really just brings no value in half court offense to the point where it's easy for opposing defenses to scheme against offense when he's on the court. He's a player that is nowhere near the defender he once was in Philadelphia. And because of that, the defense can't compensate for the fact that he is a liability on offense. And I do think at one point he was the defender that was good enough on that end of the floor to compensate for it, but he isn't this season. So he really just brings little to no value when he's on the court, which is a problem when you consider the fact that, one, they don't even start him anymore because they just have better players, and two, he's making $35+ million this season and is on a pretty big contract. A contract that's going to be hard to move because, one, we already know because the teams around the league basically said he has no value, which is why he didn't get moved during the trade deadline. And two, it's a combination that really puts a team in a tough spot because it's a big contract that doesn't even come close to the value. So it's going to be near impossible to probably trade it, and there are probably implications if they try to cut him as well. So in a way, they're kind of just stuck with him, and he really hasn't brought anything of value on the court to suggest that he was worth trading away your all-star two-guard for. And that's really disappointing considering the fact that he was the biggest part of that deal in the return for trading away that future Hall of Fame shooting guard. And honestly, I find it really sad to see Ben Simmons be what he is currently, because Ben Simmons was really good at one point. I understand the way it ended in Philadelphia. I understand he was really bad in the playoffs, and a liability at times. In fact, I would say a lot of the time, especially in that Atlanta Hawks series, and we all know about that infamous play at the end. But Ben Simmons in Philadelphia was a good player. For his career in Philadelphia, 15.9 points per game, 8.1 rebounds per game, 7.7 assists per game, was the Rookie of the Year. He deserved to win it. He had one of the better point guard seasons by a rookie ever. And at the time, I did believe he was a point guard. Now I believe he's more of a true forward. He averaged like 16, 8, and 8, which hadn't been done since the likes of Magic Johnson and Oscar Robertson as rookies. He was someone that I thought should have made the All-Star team as a rookie. I think that he should have made it as a replacement over Goran Dragic that year. Then he made 3 straight All-Star teams. He made an All-NBA team. He made an All-Defensive team. He's somebody that made a real run for Defensive Player of the Year and was one of the best defensive players in basketball. He was a player that you would stick on opposing team stars and he would give them problems because he was just that good on defense. He was a 6'10", 240-pound player that was an elite defender with absurd movement skills and was one of the best passers in the world, and he put up solid numbers. Now, there was another side for it. He never really showed statistical improvement on a linear scale, per se. He went up from year 1 to year 2, going from 15.8 points a game to 16.9 points a game, and then it kind of stayed the same, and then he kind of regressed the next season. His final season in Brooklyn at 24 years old. But overall, when you look at his career in Philadelphia, he was really good, especially for a player that was talked about the way he was. I think there were times where fans underrated him when he was in Philadelphia. I think there were times where, because the fact he didn't suit, people were quick to call him a bust. And at the time, I really found those conversations to be silly, and now I question it a bit more, and I do want to talk about that as well. Is Ben Simmons a draft bust? Well, first of all, I'm not the biggest fan of that term because I believe that calling anyone who makes it to the NBA a disappointment is kind of wrong because of the work it takes to even get a chance to play in the NBA. It takes so much work, and if you make it, you've had a successful basketball career. There's no other way around it. No matter what you do in the NBA, if you make it, you've made it. And I don't think you should be called a disappointment just because you underperformed in the best league in the world, considering the work it takes to even make it to the best league in the world. So I'm not the biggest fan of that term. And even if I were to go along with the term draft bust, there's a part of me that finds it hard to say he is one. Because it's hard for me to label someone a draft bust when they've made multiple All-Star teams, an All-NBA team, and multiple All-Defense teams in their career, which Ben Simmons has. Ben Simmons, even if he retired after the season, will have a better NBA career than at least 70% of players that play in the NBA, and probably more than that. 70 might be lowballing it. Not many players make All-NBA, All-Defense, and the All-Star team in their career, and Ben Simmons has done that. And I do think because of that, he has accomplished a decent amount in the NBA. And I wouldn't say overall it's a bad career. It might have a bad ending, especially with what's going on in Brooklyn, but his 4-year run in Philadelphia, even if it ended poorly, that was a good run. A run that not many NBA players will even come close to, statistically and accolade-wise as well. So I do think he is an accomplished player, and when you get other quote-unquote draft bust, if you put him up on the list of most disappointing number 1 picks ever, per se, I do believe that he would be by far the best on that list. However, I do think it's fair to say that even though it's hard for me to label him a quote-unquote draft bust for the fact that 1, I don't really believe in the term, and 2, and even if I did, he has accomplished a lot in his career. relative to the average NBA career, to say the least. I do think it's fair to say he has been a massive disappointment relative to what I believe were realistic expectations. Now, I know he was called the next LeBron, and I just think that we should never do that in general, and I don't think people actually took those as seriously, especially when they watched Ben Simmons play. But Ben Simmons was a really good prospect. And while I don't know if I mentioned this on the channel in the past, I might make a video about it in the future, where I feel like Andrew Wiggins and his hype entering the league was a lot more like fluff, where I don't think that the hype was generated by people who actually watched his tape in high school and college. Because I feel like when I watched his college tape, my expectations, trying to remove as much hindsight as possible, were different for him. And I feel like that hype wasn't as justified. Wiggins was a great prospect, but the hype was a bit much, and it didn't quite match the level of prospect that he was on tape, especially at Kansas. I'll talk more about that in its own video very soon. I have a script for that video, and I'm really excited for you guys to see that one in the next few days. But to keep it about Ben Simmons was a great prospect who I felt the hype was justified for. In high school, he was incredible. In college, he was incredible, and he was carrying an LSU team that wasn't the greatest team. And I know he was criticized for not making the tournament and also really not caring about playing college basketball. So there was that. I wasn't actually too worried about the college thing, I'll be honest with you. I feel like there are a lot of one and done players who have that same mindset about not really caring about college. Ben Simmons has happened to be very public about it, and I think that his one and done documentary from his time at LSU is one of the better documentaries, and I would highly recommend you guys check that out. It's really good. But Ben Simmons was incredible, and he was big, strong, had a good handle, really good passer, and he was an aggressive scorer. Not a good shooter, but he was a really aggressive player at the previous levels. He had times he would pass outside, things like that, but he never got the sense that this was going to be a player that would ever be a liability on offense, because he was highly productive, he was really efficient, despite the fact he couldn't shoot. And I will talk more about the shooting in a little bit, but I thought Ben Simmons was the prospect that was going number one no matter what. And I loved Brandon Ingram as a prospect in that class, but Ben Simmons was the guy. And I was hoping the Celtics got the number one pick so they could get Ben Simmons in that draft. I think the actual result of getting Jaylen Brown worked out better. And I do think his rookie season and the seasons to follow in Philly, to a certain extent, did so that he was worth the hype. Because even though he never improved as a shooter, and he really didn't get that much better outside of defense, he really improved on defense, but offensively he never really seemed to grow. It kind of was always the same player who put up similar numbers as an offensive scorer every year. Even with those things, we're like, this guy's really good. We're also justifiably being like, yeah, he really hasn't shown that much improvement. It's kind of disappointing that he hasn't progressed as an offensive scorer the way that you would hope from a number one pick. But I think that also speaks to how good Ben Simmons was, where you could justifiably say that he was a disappointment during his time in Philly because he didn't improve, while also being a really good NBA player. I think at his best, Ben Simmons was one of the 30 best players in basketball, because he was a 6'10" player that was one of the best defensive players in basketball and one of the best passing playmakers in basketball. That doesn't just grow on trees. He was a really good player at his best, but he failed to reach expectations. Ben Simmons is somebody, when you watch his college tape, you're like, that guy could be a superstar. He never became a superstar. And I know not everyone can be a superstar, but Ben Simmons had the talent to be a superstar. It's very evident on tape. He has so many things during the years in LSU, Montford, and with the Sixers that you just can't teach. You can't teach his frame. You can't teach his athleticism. You can't teach his feel and skill as a passing playmaker. guys that are that big with that kind of handle just don't exist either. And, he flashed it. He went head-to-head with LeBron as a rookie, and he played almost as well as LeBron did in that game. In 2018, LeBron's one of the best versions of LeBron ever. He was Rookie of the Year for a reason. He was an All-Star, All-NBA, All-Defense for a reason. He was really good. And I think the fact that I look at his career, and I think this was one of the worst possible outcomes for his career. Not just with Brooklyn, but in total. I think this is one of the lower end outcomes for him as a player. Based off what I saw from him as a prospect, I think that really speaks to the talent he has, the potential he has, and how good he could have been. Because one of the worst possible outcomes being you're still all NBA, you're still all defense, you still are an all-star, and at one point a top 10 point guard in the league, maybe closer to 5 even. That really speaks to how good of a player you are and the talent you have. And honestly, I know this might sound weird, but I think if you gave 90% of basketball players the talent, the ability, the athleticism, the frame of Ben Simmons, they would have been like a Hall of Famer, a top 5 player in the league, like maybe even the best player in the league. That's how special the intangibles and traits with Ben Simmons were as a prospect. And he didn't fully reach what I believe he could be, and he did fail to reach expectations, even if he had an overall pretty good career. Now, I do think the one myth is that it's because he can shoot. He can't shoot. I still think he's shooting with the wrong hand, but when I look at his career overall, I don't think it's much of a problem with his inability to shoot a basketball. We have seen other players be really good without an ability to shoot, and Ben Simmons was really good, and he couldn't shoot in an era that requires good shooting. And again, all-star, all-NBA, all-defense good, and he couldn't shoot the basketball, at all. It was an inability in his game. So that really speaks to more of an aggression and more of a mindset thing, which I'm not going to fully blame him for. There were things that I think have been unjustifiably used against him as far as mentality goes. But I do think it's clear that he never really had the mentality, probably since he entered the league, to be a big-time scorer. Part of me wonders if that's because he went from being the guy basically his entire life before entering the NBA to playing next to Joel Embiid, who did most of the scoring. So that might be part of it. I'm not blaming Joel Embiid for that. I'm not going to blame Embiid for being one of the most dominant bigs of his era. But there are just a lot of factors that have gone into why Ben Simmons' career has gone the way it has. I don't think it's because of a lack of talent or ability. He has tons of that. He has tools and intangibles as a player that not many even come close to. But there are other things that led to why Ben Simmons has had the career that Ben Simmons has had. And what does the future hold for him? Based off what I've seen in Brooklyn, it doesn't really look good. I think it would take him at least getting back to what he was in that final year in Philadelphia, but I don't know if that's going to even happen. Is it possible he gets back to All-Star when he really isn't even a net positive player in the NBA right now? That's tough to say. It sucks. I like Ben Simmons. I've been a Ben Simmons supporter for years. He was a part of that first ever draft class I evaluated, and he does hold a special place in my heart in that regard because he is a part of that class that really pushed me to become a content creator like I am today, and making a 20 plus minute video about Ben Simmons as sort of this think piece dump that I've created that most of you probably won't make it to this point. So I do want to see him succeed, but based off this year in Brooklyn, if it can't get better from here, and he is a player that just has proven that he's not going to be valuable and worth getting minutes in an NBA game, this might be the end. It's tough to say. He still has a few years on his big contract, and I hope he does bounce back, but there's nothing on his tape in Brooklyn that suggests that he can get back to even what he once was, let alone what he could have been at his best if everything went right.